Okay, we're going to see if the camera works today. I totally understand why people end up voting for Trump. I was working on the camera all day. Nothing was working. And this is my life. And suddenly I thought, well, I have no life. Everything sucks. Why not destroy everything? Why not vote for Donald Trump? And then I remember I have love in my heart. Or maybe it was indigestion. But I do get how people end up voting for Trump. After this nightmare is over, when Joe Biden is reelected, we have to reassess and ask ourselves, what kind of conditions did the neoliberals create that necessitated some people choosing Donald Trump? We have to ask that question again. We were asking it in 2020 when we were trying to get Bernie Sanders elected president. We created this situation. It's not just Trump. It's cameras that don't work for live streams. And when your camera doesn't work for your live stream, you just want a wrecking ball to destroy everything. I'm absolutely insane. This is the mop-up. I don't even know if this camera is working. And I don't even know if we have a show. This is the mop-up for April 7th, I think. April 7th, 2024. Thank you for finding me. I'm a very miserable David Feldman in Manhattan, where we had an earthquake Friday morning. They say animals can predict an earthquake minutes before it happens. Right before it struck, I look over, and one of my mice in the apartment is updating his last will and testament. So that's nice. He's leaving me his Nova. He's got a 1974 red Nova. But we all felt it. Everybody here in New York City felt it. Melania is living in Trump Tower, and her bed started shaking so violently for a second there, she thought the Secret Service agent she's sleeping with was back in town. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. This is basically my life. So please hit the like button. And if you want to hurt me, don't hit the like button. Police say arson was to blame for Friday's fire inside Senator Bernie Sanders' congressional office in Burlington, Vermont. The Associated Press said nobody was injured and there was minor damage to the door as well as water damage. Water damage from the saliva Bernie used to extinguish the blaze by shouting the words, and I quote, "Shamefully, senior citizens significantly pay steeper prices for insulin than any other nation in the industrialized world." And he just sprayed out the fire. Authorities say they believe that blaze was set by a male. His picture has been released, and luckily, nobody was injured. Staff members were working in the office at the time. I think Bernie was actually in Washington, D.C. We wish anybody and everybody who works for Bernie Sanders nothing but good fortune. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi is still a United States Congresswoman, and she announced that she agrees with Senator Bernie Sanders and is now calling for America to cut off arms shipments to Israel until Israel stops the killing of women and children and men in Gaza. Pelosi said it was a difficult decision because she and her husband haven't completely sold off all their Boeing stock. Unbelievable the kind of money her husband and she have made playing the stock market. Unbelievable. Besides making planes that burst open in mid-flight, Boeing also kills people as one of our Pentagon's largest defense contractors. It has not been a good couple of years for Boeing or their passengers. Kevin Foster over at the Portland Mercury reports that Boeing has made as much as $100 billion selling bombs to Israel. And, it might be more efficient giving Palestinians free airfare on a 737 MAX. Boeing's stock is down 50% in the past 5 years, which is odd because Boeing spent more than $60 billion on stock buybacks, which are designed to manipulate the market by creating an artificial scarcity of Boeing shares. Stock buybacks were illegal until Reagan became president and deregulated crime. So the stock buybacks didn't work. The planes don't work. Boeing lost the war in Afghanistan. Well, America lost the war in Afghanistan. Boeing lost all the lucrative contracts that come from the war in Afghanistan. And Mike Johnson is holding up the Ukraine supplemental. And now Nancy Pelosi supports holding up arms shipments to Israel. So clearly the victim in all this is David Calhoun, Boeing's chief executive, who is stepping down at the end of 2024 after only 4 years at the helm. The stock is at a 5-year low. The stock is selling 50% less than it was when he first became CEO. And the Financial Times reports this morning that Boeing has given Calhoun for his last year only a 45% pay bump for 2024. He's only getting a 45% pay bump. Poor guy. I think that sends a message to all the CEOs. If the stock is selling at half of what it was worth when you first took over, when revenue is down and you're killing customers, you will be punished with just a 45% pay bump. It's brutal. It is brutal being a CEO. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is in China, where she met with China's Vice Premier, He Lifeng, on Saturday. That's right, his first name is He, and I'm not making this up, the leader of China is named Xi. He and she. I hope someone in charge over there is also named they. Got to cover all your bases. Anyway, Yellen, Secretary of the Treasury Yellen, warned that President Biden doesn't appreciate the Chinese government subsidizing the Chinese electric vehicle companies in China and the solar panel industry. She's warning that Biden is worried China will flood American markets with cheaper versions of electric cars and solar panels than we can make here in the United States. We can't compete. Unlike Trump, however, Biden is not threatening tariffs. Treasury Secretary Yellen also warned Chinese companies to stop selling products to Russia that can be used in its war on Ukraine. Bloomberg reports this morning that the United States is now accusing China of providing geospatial intelligence gleaned from Chinese satellites, perhaps even Chinese surveillance flights, to Russian troops fighting in Ukraine. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said he expects Ukraine will become a member of NATO. NATO members will gather in Washington this July to celebrate NATO's 75th anniversary. And if Trump gets elected president, it's last. Speaking in Brussels, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said America will do everything it can to make sure Ukraine has the weapons it needs to defeat Russia. Everything we can, except actually give it the weapons it needs to defeat Russia. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has been asking to join NATO since 2023. Last week, Zelensky signed a new law to expand the number of Ukrainians who can be drafted. He also signed some laws to crack down on draft dodgers. The Ukrainian military currently has 1 million soldiers fighting the Russians. Since war broke out, Zelensky has declared martial law, giving him greater powers to mobilize his citizens. Zelensky warned on Saturday that Ukraine could run out of air defense missiles soon. Appearing on Ukrainian television Saturday, Zelensky said, quote, "If they keep hitting Ukraine every day, the way they have for the last month, we might run out of missiles, and the partners know it." And by partners, he means Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, who is holding up a $60 billion aid package for Ukraine, even though it's already passed in the Senate and would pass easily in the House if Mike Johnson would bring it to the floor for a vote. Zelensky accused Trump's boss, Vladimir Putin, of arming Russian drones with poison gas in direct violation of international treaties. On Saturday, the Russian government continued to spread the lie that Ukraine was behind last month's terrorist attack inside a Moscow concert hall, killing 145. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador announced his country severed ties with Ecuador after Ecuador's far-right conservative government violated international law by ordering its police to storm Mexico's foreign embassy and grab Jorge Glass, Ecuador's previous vice president, who has been holed up in the Mexican embassy since December. Mexican diplomats in Ecuador warned they are now fearful that Glass will be killed. In 2017, Vice President Glass was accused of being part of a bribery scheme where he was charged with accepting $15 million from a construction firm. Ecuador's current president is 35-year-old conservative businessman Daniel Noboa, who was elected in October of 2023 amid political assassinations and gang violence. If you've seen his crackdowns on gangs, it is some of the most disgraceful human rights violations you'll ever see. It's even worse than American prisons, the way they're treating the gang members. No due process. If you have a tattoo, you're rounded up, and I don't even want to describe it. Speaking of embassies, on Saturday, Hezbollah warned that Israel's attack on the Iranian embassy in Syria that's killed some of Iran's top military leaders has made an Iranian attack on Israel inevitable. Hezbollah is the Iranian-backed paramilitary group that has secured political legitimacy in southern Lebanon. Israel is fighting Hamas, which gets some of its support from Iran, but not like the way Hezbollah does. Hezbollah represents Iran in Lebanon and Syria. Hezbollah and Israel have engaged in battles along Israel's northern border, and lately there have been some flare-ups that run the risk of turning into a full-fledged war, like the one between Israel and Hezbollah back in 2006. That was a disaster for both Israel and Beirut. Beirut did not fare well during that. Well, Rudy Giuliani, I'm using euphemisms. It was bad what happened. So we have to stop this from escalating. Rudy Giuliani has a podcast and a radio show where he comments on the day's events. Now, as you know, there was this earthquake here in New York City Friday morning, and who better to calm this city in the middle of a crisis than America's mayor? Here is Rudy, like he did on 9/11, comforting the frightened, soothing the easily excited on his podcast/live stream.
We left the communist state of New York, and then we were in the state of
inebriation, state of end-stage liver disease?
Connecticut.
Oh, right, Connecticut. So you were in Connecticut. Go on. Go on.
And we just escaped all of the earthquakes. And then we got to Massachusetts, which probably had some earthquakes. And we got to New Hampshire with no earthquakes, which is telling me that somebody's sending us a message. The communist states are getting earthquakes. I think that's what look at California. You can't have more earthquakes than California. You want to figure out why?
Why? I want to figure out why you're talking about California and New York being communist states. Is it because you've graduated from Jim Beam to mushrooms? What are you taking? He's on mushrooms. And I'm not talking about Trump's penis, although I think he's been on that as well. Stormy Daniels said Trump's penis reminded her of a mushroom, and everyone says that's because his penis is shaped like a mushroom. No, it reminded her of a mushroom because it's nothing but fungus. Here is Marjorie Taylor Greene on the New York earthquake. She chimed in. Go ahead, Marjorie. She did a tweet. Let's read her tweet. This is what she said. God is sending America strong signs to tell us to repent. Earthquakes and eclipses and many more things to come. I pray that our country listens. That's not God. That's geology and astronomy. That's science. You dumb hick. You dumb bigoted hick. Hard to believe that before becoming a United States Congresswoman, she was a devoted follower of QAnon. I've played the videos of her quoting QAnon chat rooms with supreme confidence. You dumb hick. Well, as long as we're talking about signs from God, you dumb hick, the New York Post reports that the epicenter of the earthquake was not communist New York. It was Donald Trump's Bedminster Golf Club in New Jersey. So maybe God is sending a sign, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Bedminster Golf Course holds a special place for the former president. His first wife, Ivana, the mother of his 3 worthless adult children, is buried in an unmarked grave at the golf course. I've played that video. Mr. Billionaire buries the mother of his children, his first wife, in an unmarked grave at Bedminster Golf Club. He loves Bedminster. He met Alina Habba at Bedminster. She's a New Jersey strip mall lawyer who's initially did some work for Bedminster, and he took her on full time. And so far, she's only cost him $700 million in judgments. And now, the Washington Post is reporting that Donald Trump's personal physician is Dr. Bruce A. Aaronwald, a 64-year-old osteopathic physician from New Jersey. And not to denigrate osteopathic doctors. I'm not going to call them glorified chiropractors. I'm not going to denigrate chiropractors or osteopathic doctors. You know, they can do surgery and they can prescribe drugs. They're non-traditional. They're hands-on, kind of like Donald Trump is. Well, so he's got a new doctor, Dr. Bruce A. Aaronwald, a New Jersey doctor, doing all his physicals and writing letters saying he's a healthy man. We'll be hearing a lot more from osteopath, Dr. Bruce A. Aaronwald. And again, I'm not denigrating chiropractors or bone doctors. I'm just denigrating anybody dumb enough to become Donald Trump's physician. Doesn't end well. Trump's previous physician, for example, was White House doctor Ronnie Jackson, who Trump nominated to be head of our VA. He was Donald Trump's personal physician in the White House, and he was also a rear admiral. And Trump said, this guy is so good at keeping secrets about my various conditions, like tertiary syphilis. He said, I'm going to name you to be head of our VA, take care of our veterans. But then a congressional probe revealed that Dr. Ronnie Jackson drank, was abusive towards female White House staffers, and was handing out uppers and downers to Oval Office employees like they were Tic Tacs and he was Dr. Nick. Dr. Jackson was a rear admiral at the time and a doctor. He left because everything Donald Trump touches Dr. Ronny Jackson left the White House disgraced. We found out what he did. So he wasn't going to be in the VA, heading the VA, and he was kind of disgraced. So he had no choice but to get himself elected to Congress representing Texas. This is what you do when you're disgraced. You become a Republican congressman, like Rick Scott, the guy who owned a chain of hospitals that ripped off Medicare and Medicaid to the tune of $1 billion, and the Justice Department cracked down on him, and they ended up paying a $1.7 billion fine. They didn't send him to prison because he's rich and white, but, he was ruined, so he ran for governor of Florida. Anyway, the Texas Tribune reported on March 7th that, once again, everyone Donald Trump touches turns to crap. Turns out Dr. Ronny Jackson was a rear admiral in the Navy. 3 decades of military service. Trump wanted to make him the head of the VA. He was a rear admiral, and now because he worked for Donald Trump, he's been demoted to captain. This is the truth. It's been an underreported story. The Washington Post says that an inspector general's report from 2022 concluded that as Trump's White House physician, Dr. Ronny Jackson, quote, berated subordinates in the White House medical unit, made sexual and denigrating statements about a female subordinate, consumed alcohol inappropriately with subordinates, and consumed the sleep drug Ambien while on duty as the president's physician, unquote. Now, Congressman Dr. former Rear Admiral, now Captain Jackson, has never acknowledged that he was demoted from Rear Admiral to Captain. It happened, I think, 2 years ago, but we're just finding out now. In his autobiography, written after that Inspector General's report, Congressman Dr. Ronny, former Admiral, now Captain Jackson, in his book called The Charges Against Him Politically Motivated. He said the Inspector General was politically motivated. No, you were mixing sleeping pills with alcohol and abusing White House staffers. But this is what they do in MAGA land. You get caught, you get arrested, you get demoted. It's all political. No, it's illegal. It's illegal. But Dr. Ronny Jackson fared much better than Trump's previous personal physician, Dr. Harold Bornstein. Bornstein was a gastroenterologist who specialized in colonoscopies. So just like Ronny Jackson, you could say he too was a rear admiral. Do you remember Dr. Bornstein? He was Trump's physician for 36 years. And during the 2016 presidential campaign, Dr. Bornstein insisted Trump was the healthiest patient he ever had. In December of 2015, right before the Iowa caucuses, Dr. Bornstein wrote a note insisting that if elected, Donald Trump would be remembered as the healthiest president in American history. After Trump was elected, though, Dr. Bornstein was hoping to become Trump's personal physician in the White House, but Trump went with Dr. Ronny Jackson. On February 1st, 2017, this was just days after Trump took office, Dr. Bornstein, Trump's former physician, gave an interview to the New York Times where he let slip that Donald Trump takes Propecia, a hair growth medicine. He also said Trump is on statins for his elevated cholesterol. Yeah, you don't want to give up Big Macs. And he suffers from chronic skin problems that need to be treated what, by being spray painted orange? I don't know what that is. But 2 days after Dr. Harold Bornstein gave that interview, Trump's bodyguard and his lawyer stormed into the medical offices on Park Avenue of Dr. Harold Bornstein. They kicked open the door. I'm not making this up. And they retrieved, while Dr. Harold Bornstein was there, they just kicked open the door and retrieved all of Trump's medical files. This is all true. The medical files with Trump's name on them and Trump's other medical files with, according to the Washington Post, Trump's aliases on them. Donald Trump made his doctor keep 2 sets of medical files, kind of like Weisselberg's books over at Trump.org. Keep two medical files. A year later, after the raid, Dr. Harold Bornstein, then Trump's former doctor, talked with the Washington Post, telling them that he felt sad and frightened by how Trump's lawyer and bodyguard stormed into his office and stole his medical files without a court order, without permission. Dr. Bornstein said, quote, "I feel raped. That's how I feel, raped," unquote. Only Donald Trump could have a doctor who doesn't know the definition of rape. But Dr. Harold Bornstein said he was frightened and sad. He said, "I can't believe anybody was making a big deal out of a drug to grow his hair that seemed to be so important." He said, "It's certainly not a breach of medical trust to tell somebody they take Propecia to grow their hair. What's the matter with that?" He then admitted that his letter stating with absolute certitude that Donald Trump was the healthiest patient he ever had was in fact dictated to him by Donald Trump himself. Imagine that. Can you imagine Donald Trump doing that? Being disrespectful to a physician, especially Bornstein, who was the Trump family physician. He treated Donald Trump for 30 years, did all of Trump's colonoscopies. I'm not making that up. And that's got to be pleasant. I think all of us have done Trump's colonoscopies. His first term was a 4-year colonoscopy. He treated all of Donald Trump's wives. Dr. Harold Bornstein knew all the family secrets. And before Bornstein was Trump's doctor was Bornstein's father. So it's the whole family has been treating the Trump family. And according to Bornstein, Harold Bornstein, when Trump's bodyguard and lawyers stormed into his medical office and seized the files, they spotted a framed picture of Bornstein with Donald Trump and took it off the wall and ordered him to destroy it. That was 2017, right when the Trump administration began. 2 days after January 6th in 2021, January 8th, 2021, Dr. Harold Bornstein was dead at the age of 73. Nobody knows how or where. Google this. The New York Times, the Washington Post reported his death, but it was in the immediate aftermath of January 6th. And at the time, it wasn't a big enough story. To this day, nobody knows how or where he died. I would check Bedminster Golf Club in New Jersey. I think there's probably an unmarked grave. I think he fell down the same flight of stairs Ivana did. But good luck to New Jersey osteopath Dr. Bruce Aronwald. Trump's all yours now. Manja. Enjoy. Eat up. What could possibly go wrong? The Associated Press writes that former Trump officials are now among the most vocal opponents to Donald Trump's reelection. Now, we know that Mike Pence says he's not voting for Donald Trump because of that, the noose. And Mark Esper, Trump's last defense secretary, has repeatedly called Trump a threat to democracy. John Bolton, Ambassador John Bolton, he was Trump's national security advisor. Bolton not only called Trump too stupid to become a dictator, but he's also said Trump is unfit to serve as only a president. Last year, CNN collected statements from 24 former Trump White House officials about Trump, what they thought of him. Bill Barr, his attorney general, has been quoted as saying about Trump's role on January 6, quote, "Someone who engaged in that kind of bullying about a process that is fundamental to our system and to our self-government shouldn't be anywhere near the Oval Office," unquote. But Bill Barr, opportunistic infection that he is, has yet to say whether he's voting for Trump again. Retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, in his farewell speech, called Trump a wannabe dictator. Trump's first Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, the former head of Exxon, off the record called Donald Trump an effing moron. On the record, he said Trump's understanding of global events, his understanding of global history, his understanding of U.S. history was limited. It's really hard to have a conversation with someone who doesn't even understand the concept for why we're talking about this. That's his way of saying Donald Trump is stupid. His second chief of staff, General John Kelly, said, quote, "A person that has nothing but contempt for our democratic institutions, our Constitution, and the rule of law. That is who Donald Trump is. There is nothing more that can be said. God help us," unquote. Kelly, General Kelly, whose son died serving in our nation's military, gave one interview. He gave it to the Atlantic magazine, where he said Trump referred to American soldiers killed in wars overseas as quote unquote suckers. Donald Trump becomes the first president in American history to be tried in a criminal courtroom a week from this Monday, April 15th. Now, the judge in that case amended Trump's gag order last week and is now forbidding Trump from attacking family members of anyone associated with the trial. The judge issued a gag order, forgot to say, oh, by the way, don't threaten my daughter. He amended the gag order last week and said, stay away from my daughter. But that has not stopped Donald Trump from continuing to post on his Truth Social account and in speeches attacks against Judge Merchan's daughter, in direct violation, this time in direct violation of the gag order. Last night, Trump took to social media, comparing himself to Nelson Mandela, saying, quote, "It would be a great honor to be locked up for violating the recent gag order." He's calling himself America's Mandela, Donald Trump. Nelson Mandela, served 27 years in prison. I'll tell you what, Donald, let's make a deal. You do 27 years in prison like Mandela, and then when you get out, you can lead your country the same way Mandela did. Nelson Mandela, was arrested in 1962, leading the African National Congress in its fight against South Africa's racist apartheid regime. Donald Trump is on trial for hiding hush money paid to a porn star he slept with right after Melania gave birth to their son. Wow, the similarities between Trump and Nelson Mandela are positively freaky. Sometimes I confuse the two. This is what he wrote. He's been saying stuff on the campaign trail. This is what he wrote. He said of Judge Merchan, if this partisan hack wants to put me in the clink, what is he, a character in Hogan's Heroes? For speaking the open, the clink? For speaking the open and obvious truth, I will gladly become a modern day Nelson Mandela. It will be my great honor, in all caps. So, what do you think? I'm not Judge Merchan, but I would lock him up. But, you know, I don't have to worry about getting killed the way Judge Merchan does. I mean, you take on Trump, the death threats are never ending. What do you think several nights at Rikers Island would do to Donald Trump? And it could happen, like they could come for him right now and lock him up. A judge has the power to order someone locked up, at least overnight. That's the way it works here in America. The lawyers cannot stop it. The marshals come, they grab Trump, they lock him up, and then the lawyers have to go through the process of getting him released. We've all spent at least a night in jail. Is it time for Donald Trump to have at least one night in jail? What do you think? Let me know in the comments section. Does that turn him into a martyr, to a modern day Nelson Mandela? Or would a night or two in jail give him an idea of what he's up against? If you've ever been in jail, it's pretty scary. 6 hours, even 6 hours, the claustrophobia alone. What do you think? Or would it turn him into a martyr? Trump is referring to those arrested on January 6th as martyrs. Trump is now referring to those arrested and convicted for the January 6th insurrection as Joe Biden's January 6th hostages. Rebecca Lavrenz, a 71-year-old woman, a grandmother, was convicted last week for entering the Capitol on January 6th. She's a grandmother. In her defense, she was seen on tape shouting at everybody to wipe your feet. A grandmother, stormed the Capitol on January 6th. The Denver Gazette is reporting that she could be fined $200,000, which she would end up paying by sending cards every year filled with just $5 till it gets to, I don't know. And she could end up spending a year in the clink. The clink. And he calls Joe Biden old. He's calling prison the clink. And Joe Biden's the senile one. Well, Donald Trump took to social media trying to raise money for grandma and posted a link to a GoFundMe page that's trying to raise $100,000 in legal fees for her. The Washington Post reports that Trump, on the campaign trail, it should be the campaign trial. Excuse me. I have the remnants of a cold. Okay. Where was I? I completely lost my train of thought. There he is kissing the flag without consent. The Washington Post, right? Right. The Washington Post reports that Republican House Conference Chair, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who is hoping to be named Donald Trump's running mate, she has referred to the people doing time for the insurrection as January 6 hostages. You know, just like the ones in the tunnels in Gaza. On Newsmax last week, Speaker Mike Johnson said that a lot of the people arrested on January 6 were simply wandering around the Capitol because it was open that day. You're a liar, Mike Johnson. You're just an effing liar. It was not open that day. It was closed. It was opened by the insurrectionists who jammed flagpoles into police officers and then used those same flagpoles to shatter windows that they could then crawl through. If by open, if that's what you mean by open, yes, it was open. Mike Johnson is a liar, and he's going to burn in hell. He's going to burn in hell. He may already be there. The Capitol was officially closed that day, and for the speaker just to lie that way, it is end times. It's hard to dislike Bobby Kennedy Jr. It is. It's hard for me to dislike Bobby Kennedy Jr., but it's getting a lot easier. On Friday, Kennedy said if he were elected president, he would order a special counsel to look into what he referred to as the harsh treatment of the January 6 prisoners. Kennedy said that he himself had not examined the evidence, but people he referred to as reasonable, they tell him that the events of January 6 don't meet the threshold of an insurrection. People he talked to who are reasonable, so that would be Joe Rogan and Shane Gillis. Kennedy added that there was no evidence any of the men arrested were attempting to seize the reins of power. Well, they were trying to stop the certification of an election that would have made Joe Biden president. I'm pretty sure that's seizing the reins of power. And others were looking to kill or kidnap Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence. Kennedy misspoke and said the people who stormed the Capitol weren't carrying guns. Not true. Absolutely not true. Very few of the insurrectionists were arrested that day, so there's no idea how many were actually carrying guns. But we do know there were guns dropped on the floor of the Capitol as they ran, and several of the insurrectionists were photographed carrying sidearms. But more importantly, we also know that before Donald Trump spoke that day on the Ellipse, he was enraged because the Secret Service was taking their sweet time letting people in to the before the stage because the magnetometers showed most of the people lining up had guns. And Trump was furious. He said, let them in. I'm not making this up. He says, I don't care if they have guns. Those guns are not intended for me, unquote. That's how we know with absolute certitude that the insurrectionists had guns. Trump was speaking behind bulletproof glass on the Ellipse. And when he was told we can't let everybody in, they have to check their weapons, he said, what do I care? Those guns are not intended for me, unquote. Look it up. Well, Kennedy has been all over the map on January 6. He initially sent out a fundraising email last week referring to the January 6ers as activists who were merely exercising their constitutional rights. Then he walked that statement back only to come out with a new statement calling them unarmed as well as unfairly persecuted by the Biden White House. And he's going to appoint a special counsel, if he's president, to investigate their mistreatment. It should come as no surprise that Donald Trump has expressed interest in naming Bobby Kennedy Jr. as his running mate. Kennedy, however, has said he's not interested. Then again, one day Bobby Kennedy says he's not anti-vax. The next day he says he is. Who knows? Trump might ask him on the right day, and Bobby Kennedy will be his running mate. Then there's Louisiana Congressman Clay Higgins, who claims the January 6ers were entrapped by the FBI. He says January 6th was a honeypot that the FBI concocted to entrap Trump supporters. The New York Times reports on Saturday that Clay Higgins, Louisiana Congressman Clay Higgins, appeared on a podcast last week wearing a T-shirt with the logo for the Three Percenters emblazoned on it. Do you know who the Three Percenters are? They're kind of like the Oath Keepers. The Three Percenters are an anti-government militia who maintain it only took 3% of the American people to defeat the British in 1776. That they maintain that only 3% of the population took arms against the British. And the message is all you need is 3% of the country to overturn the United States government. Well, they're wrong. It was more than 3% that took on the British. During the podcast, Congressman Clay Higgins once again repeated the lie that Joe Biden stole the 2020 presidential election. And then Clay Higgins said, because he's a former police officer, that he's been conducting his own research and concluded that the January 6ers were tricked into invading the Capitol by the FBI in order to embarrass Donald Trump, as if Donald Trump needs the FBI to make an embarrassment out of himself. So why is the New York Times doing a profile on Louisiana Congressman Clay Higgins? Why? Because Speaker Mike Johnson has named Clay Higgins as one of the impeachment managers who will go to the Senate and try Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas, who was impeached at the end of January. Johnson is expected to deliver the articles of impeachment to the Senate a week from this Monday, nearly 3 months after they impeached Alejandro Mayorkas. What's the rush? Everything, boy, he's so impatient. 3 months. That's how urgent the migrant crisis is. They're waiting 3 months to begin the trial to convict the man responsible for all of it. But there won't be a trial. They don't have the votes for conviction, and Chuck Schumer is also just going to throw it to the Senate for an up or down vote without a trial. They're not going to dignify the articles of impeachment walked into the Senate chamber by Clay Higgins, who used to be a police officer in Louisiana, but he did some nasty things to black people, and he had to give up his career as a police officer and become a Republican congressman. This is when you can't do anything else, become a Republican congressman. John Tester is the Democratic senator from Montana. He's running for re-election. Republicans think one of the paths towards regaining control of the Senate is by grabbing Tester's seat. The Democratic and Republican primaries for Montana are in early June, and one of the leading contenders for the Republican nomination is Tim Sheehy, who has never held elective office, But Sheehy was a Navy SEAL who served in Afghanistan, and he has the wound to show it, and he'll show it. On the campaign trail, he likes to brag there's a bullet lodged in his arm that landed there in Afghanistan. But now, he's a Republican, the Washington Post reports that Sheehy is lying about the bullet in his arm. He can't seem to get his story straight about how the bullet ended up in his arm. In fact, according to the Washington Post, Sheehy has several versions of how that bullet ended up in his arm. Now, in 2015, Sheehy told a park ranger that he accidentally, now try to follow the logic here, okay? In 2015, he told a park ranger that he accidentally dropped his Colt 45 and it discharged into his left arm. Sheehy, according to the park ranger's report, told the ranger, who was writing him a summons for firing a weapon inside a national park, that he didn't fire the weapon. I dropped my Colt 45, went off, and it shot me in the arm. This is a Navy SEAL. He dropped his Colt 45, and it went into his arm. Sheehy, however, now insists that story that he told the park ranger isn't true. This is his version of events now. He says he fell in the park and he required medical attention and he was rushed to the hospital. And when he hurt his arm and he told the doctor and the nurses that his Colt 45 discharged, and that's why there's a bullet in his arm. But he said he was lying when he said that. But because of that lie, says Sheehy, that lie necessitated a visit from a park ranger who came to the hospital room and gave him like a $550 citation for firing his weapon in a national park. And he paid the citation. Why would he tell the hospital there was a bullet in his arm when they were examining him? And why would he say my Colt 45 accidentally discharged? Why wouldn't he say what he's saying on the campaign trail, that he was shot in Afghanistan? Well, he says now it was all part of his plan to protect the soldiers he served with in Afghanistan. Can you follow this? It goes like this. Sheehy did not want to tell the hospital staff how the bullet got into his arm because he's not quite sure if the bullet was fired in Afghanistan by the Taliban or if he was the victim of friendly fire. I'm starting to think there's a good chance there was some fracking going on. So, fragging. It's fragging, right? Fragging. So, according to, I don't know if you can follow this, but he said to the doctors and the nurses that when he fell and had to go to the hospital in Montana, he lied to them and said he accidentally shot himself in the left arm. So that way there would be an explanation for the bullet in his arm that ended up there 5 years ago when he was shot either by soldiers or the Taliban. He said it was all part of his plan to protect his fellow soldiers from being dragged through the mud to determine how the bullet ended up there. Not a good liar. The Post says he has come up with several stories about the bullet in his arm, but the record shows that he paid a $525 fine for illegally discharging a weapon inside a national park to protect the soldiers he served with in Afghanistan. I'm sorry. I thought I could unpack that. I couldn't. Anyway, he might be the Republican nominee taking on John Tester in Montana. Please, God, let him be the guy who gets the Republican nomination. Damian Fisher, this is even worse. I don't even know if I should. How am I doing? Okay. Do I want to? This is just, all I do is look for stories about Republicans. I don't know. Do we want to go through this? I could wrap it up. All right. Damian Fisher writes for the New Hampshire Center for Public Interest Journalism. Since 2020, Fisher has been trying to get his hands on Republican state representative in New Hampshire, John Stone's employment records for when he served as a police officer in Claremont, New Hampshire. So he's a state representative. He's a Republican. He's a former police officer who could no longer work for the police. So, as a Republican, he ran for office and got elected. So Damian Fisher, who writes for the New Hampshire Center for Public Interest Journalism, wanted to get his hands on his John Stone's employment records for the New Hampshire police. I think it's Claremont, New Hampshire. It took 4 years, but the New Hampshire Supreme Court finally released New Hampshire Republican State Representative John Stone's record as police officer, and it gives us some insight into why he is no longer allowed to be a police officer and why he had to become a Republican politician. And it gives us some insight into why he tried to keep the records sealed. So, according to the records, a detective on the police force began an investigation into allegations that the then police officer, John Stone, was carrying on some sort of relationship with a 15-year-old high school student. They would talk on the phone for hours at a time. And police officer John Stone, according to the records, didn't like being investigated. And when it became apparent to him, according to the records, that he's going to get fired, he threatened to rape and kill the police chief's wife. That's according to the report. The report said detectives and fellow officers were terrified that he was going to go postal, that he was going to show up to work and shoot up the place. They used the term postal. Stone was fired. But he worked out a deal where he would leave the police department if his record was sealed so he could find other work. There's no need for people to know that he threatened to rape and kill his boss. There's no need for anybody to know that the detective who was looking into his relationship with a then 15-year-old high school student slept with a gun by his nightstand, terrified that now State Representative John Stone was going to break into his home and shoot him. Why does anybody need to know that? So his employment record was sealed, and he was able to get a job as a prison guard. And he opened up a gun store in New Hampshire, because that's who you want selling guns, having access to hundreds of guns and trying to determine whether or not it's safe to sell a gun to this person, and a prison guard. Then he got himself elected to the New Hampshire State Legislature, where he sits on the House Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. That would be State Representative John Stone. He's been elected twice in New Hampshire. See a pattern developing here? Well, when it comes to the Electoral College, Nebraska is not a winner-take-all state. Electors are distributed proportionally, which is why Joe Biden got one electoral vote in New Hampshire. Last week, on orders from Donald Trump, Republicans in Nebraska attached an amendment to a totally unrelated bill that would have turned Nebraska into a winner-take-all state, which, because Nebraska is reliably red, would mean Joe Biden would get one less vote in November. The amendment failed to pass. It's now back in committee. And the Washington Post reports, with the end of Nebraska's legislative year quickly approaching, it is unlikely the State House will vote again on whether or not to make Nebraska a winner-take-all state. Republican State Senator John Arch is the Speaker of the Nebraska legislature. I think it's unicameral. I think that's why he would be this. I'm not sure. I think Nebraska only has one chamber. I'm not positive. So he is the Republican in charge of the Nebraska legislature, and he said on Friday that the time for adding bills to bills is over. In other words, we're not attaching an amendment to any bills. We're not voting on changing how we do the Electoral College. And that was final. Donald Trump didn't like that. The Nebraska Examiner reports this morning that Donald Trump, when he heard that they weren't going to change the Electoral College in Nebraska, he got on the phone with State Senator Tom Brewer, who chairs Nebraska's state legislature's Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. And Senator Brewer is a very well-respected Republican. He's a decorated military veteran. So Donald Trump called him, and they talked military veteran to bone spurs. According to the Nebraska Examiner, when Trump saw there was no chance of this amendment to make Nebraska a winner-take-all state, when he saw that, he got on the phone and ordered this decorated military veteran to bring the bill to the floor. Get it on the floor. Trump told him it was too important and you can't give up. Brewer tried to calmly explain there were only 4 days left in Nebraska's legislative session, and this is not how things get done. Trump reportedly blew up at Brewer, a decorated veteran, and threatened Brewer that unless you do what you're told, I, Donald Trump, will destroy your political career. Brewer calmly explained that because of term limits in Nebraska, his political career already is destroyed. He's been term limited out, Brewer. This is how Donald Trump tests the boundaries of loyalty. I don't know why anybody in the Republican Party would vote for him. Trump's Truth Social stock is down 50% since it began trading on the NASDAQ on March 26. On Friday, it closed down more than 12%. On paper, Trump's stake in the company was worth $5 billion. When it first began trading, it is now set to be worth $3 billion. On paper, Trump lost $2 billion in 1 week, and he cannot sell the stock for another 6 months. By then, it will be worthless. It's impossible to short. All the options have been purchased. His stock is the most shorted stock on Wall Street. I'm not making that up. Everybody on Wall Street is betting that his Truth Social stock will be worthless, just like Donald Trump. The Financial Times, by the way, yeah, okay. It's selling at $40.59 as of Friday. It was down 12% on Friday. The Financial Times profiled the auditor Trump's Truth Social hired back in 2022 to help Truth Social file all its SEC paperwork and guide it into a public offering. The company, BF Borgers, is working out of a tiny office in Colorado. And according to the Financial Times, BF Borgers has run afoul of regulators numerous times in both America and Canada. The Financial Times says auditors, this is a company that audits, right? Auditors have to be audited themselves by industry regulators. BF Borgers, according to the Financial Times, has one of the worst inspection records among the hundreds of companies that do what it does. The Financial Times writes, examiners found flaws in 21 of the 21 audits they sampled, including failure to properly check accounts and to test accounting policies. 2 BF Borgers audit directors have been banned from working for United States corporations for the next 5 years. Donald Trump only surrounds himself with the best people. And that's who he hired to audit Truth Social, to make sure that it was on the up and up and shepherd its public offering. Hard to believe his stake in the company a week ago was valued by the auditors at $6 billion, even though the company has never turned a profit. Hard to believe. The auditors said he's worth $6 billion. My nephew made this. Isn't this great? Straight out of money. My nephew did that. He does a lot of things artistically. That's the only thing I can show you. That's pretty funny. The new job numbers are out. Unemployment for March, 3.8%. 3.8%. 303,000 new jobs added in March. Maria Bartiromo did not take this news too well over at Fox News.
It's a good number, no question.
Well, it's a good number, but is it too good for rate cuts, Bob Dahl? I mean, yesterday we heard from Neil Kashkari saying, I'm penciling in 2 cuts, but there's a chance there's no at all. If the economy's on fire like this and we got 303,000 jobs in the month of March, why cut interest rates?
Because the economy is stronger than expected. Inflation recently is not coming down. You're absolutely right. The probability of cuts continues to be pushed out in time and reduced in amount.
The economy's on fire. Joe Biden is an arsonist. He set fire to the economy. He's a pyromaniac. And now we're not going to get rate cuts. Yeah, well, he can't lower interest rates because Jerome Powell, they say now, because everybody's working, that it's inflationary, and that means the Fed won't lower interest rates. If we've learned anything, inflation is coming down, and it has nothing to do with interest rates. The Heritage Foundation
Trump is in the lead, I think, in 4 of the 5.
Hang on, you idiot. The Heritage Foundation is drawing up plans for Trump's first 100 days in office. It's calling for a dismantling of the entire administrative state, taking the gloves off, and basically decriminalizing theft. This is Steve Moore. He's an economist from the Heritage Foundation. And Trump wanted to appoint him, Steve Moore, to serve on the board of the Federal Reserve. But it was a Ronnie Jackson moment. They started examining Steve Moore's writings, and his personal life came under scrutiny, and people said, no, he can't serve on the Fed. But here he is, once again carrying Trump's water. Here he is explaining why Biden's job numbers are so high and why the stock market is breaking records.
Trump is in the lead, I think, in 4 of the 5 key battleground states. I just
6 out of
wonder
7.
how much.
Yeah, 6 out of 7.
6 out of 7. I just wonder if maybe the market is pricing in a little bit, and employers too, the idea that maybe we're going to get a new president in November.
Yes, that's why the job market is on fire. Nothing to do with the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. Nothing to do with the stimulus. No, it's everybody's going, hey, Trump is going to be president. And we all know how well that went, where he crapped the bed and we had the worst economy since Herbert Hoover. Let's start hiring and let's start loading up on the stock market. That's Steve Moore, who will say anything for money. This is from back when, this is from the New York Times, when the New York Times, when Trump was thinking of appointing him to be on the Federal Reserve. This is from the New York Times. Let me read this and then I'll wrap it up. They reviewed some of his writings. During a 2016 debate on the minimum wage, for example, Mr. Moore talked about how to get more Americans into the labor market. In a serious tone, Mr. Moore said he would like to see more preteens working. Quote, I'm a radical on this, he said. I'd get rid of a lot of these child labor laws. I want people starting to work at 11 or 12. Shall we continue? From the Wall Street Journal, headline, Trump Fed pick. Stephen Moore owes over $75,000 in unpaid taxes. New York Times, Trump's Fed picks divorce records are put under temporary seal. Well, we don't want to get into his personal life. What is it? I mean, sure, he wants 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds to work in the factory, but we don't need to get into his divorce. Well, why do we need to get personal here? Like Allison A. Moore, plaintiff, versus Stephen K. Moore, defendant, civil action number 1006 in the Circuit Court of Fairfax County, Virginia. We don't. What kind of show am I doing here where I would read from that? This is the politics of personal destruction. I would never read, quote, the defendant's refusal to pay spousal support, child support, and transfer the remaining $220,000 he owed the plaintiff caused her to use her savings, that would be his wife, to pay for her expenses. The defendant, that would be Steve Moore, who believes 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds should go get a job, especially if Steve Moore is your father and he isn't paying child support. You're damn right. You better go get a job. The defendant's failure to refinance the marital residence, nice guy, right? This is Heritage Foundation. He'll be part of the Trump White House, right? This is from The Guardian. This is when Trump was trying to get him over at the Federal Reserve. Headline, Trump Fed pick was held in contempt for failing to pay ex-wife over $300,000. What a guy. This is from The Guardian. Shall we? No. Why is The Guardian? What do we have to dig? I'm not going to read. The 2010 divorce filing from Moore's wife said he had destroyed their marriage through adultery after creating 2 accounts on the dating website Match.com and beginning an affair with a woman early in 2010. I am not going to read this because I don't care about people's personal lives. Moore is said to have discussed the affair openly and tastelessly with his then wife, and to have said at one point, quote, "I have 2 women, and what's really bad is when they fight over you." What, he's got 2 women fighting over him. You sleep with them. It's your turn. I'm already defiled. He also left evidence of the relationship around the home, the filing said. Well, that's The Guardian reporting that. I'm not going to dignify this kind of got you journalism. In a divorce filing in August 20, in a divorce filing in August 2010, Moore, was accused of inflicting emotional and psychological abuse on his ex-wife during their 20-year marriage. Allison Moore said in the filing she had been forced to flee their home to protect herself. She was granted a divorce in May of 2011. Moore said in a court filing signed in April of 2011, he admitted all the allegations in Allison Moore's divorce complaint. He declined to comment for this article, which I am not going to dignify. This has nothing to do with the Fed or the Heritage Foundation. This is just lascivious. Moore's 2018 book, Trumponomics, co-authored with the veteran economist Arthur Laffer. Arthur Laffer, the Laffer curve, the guy who invented supply-side economics, the trickle-down theory. Steve Moore wrote a book called Trumponomics with Arthur Laffer. And in their book, Steve Moore wrote, many Americans felt a sense of not being loved. He tied that to divorce and family breakup. He argued this is one reason people should be required to work to receive money from government assistance programs. He has frequently derided the views of the American left on cultural issues, claiming in a 2015 article published by the Christian Broadcasting Network that to liberals, if you support traditional marriage, you're a fascist. No, if you work for the Heritage Foundation, Steve Moore, you're a fascist. But we're not going to read more from The Guardian, one of the most respected news organizations in the world. We're not going to sink to their level. Oh, did I already read that? Well, maybe I should read it again to make sure I got every word right. I think, is that it? Yeah. I think that's it. I just want to make sure. Yeah. Okay. You see a pattern developing? You cannot separate the personal from the political. These people are bad, and they're out of touch with their personal traumas, and instead of seeking help, they just congregate and hate together. That's what the Republican Party is. It's very dangerous. It's very reminiscent of the people Hitler surrounded himself with. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed any of this, please hit the like button so I remain in your feed. Please share this with your friends. Leave a comment. This is a MAGA-free zone. We are doing careful hygiene. If you're a Republican, there's no debate. You're a Nazi, you're a fascist, you're worthless, and a moron, and your comments are not welcome on my website or my channel. We do not talk to mental defectives. So do not leave a comment. There's nothing to discuss, nothing to argue. This is a MAGA free zone. So it's become a very pleasant area to leave comments, and I really am enjoying reading your comments and reporting some of the MAGA supporters. I enjoy deleting their comments. So if you're a MAGA troll, just keep leaving those comments and see where it gets you. What else? Thank you to Bob in the chat room. And I think that covers it. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you for listening to me. It's a privilege to be able to talk to you, unless you're a Republican, in which case go F yourself. Put everything you have into DJT stock. Like, if there's any gold in your teeth, remove it, get cash for it, and put it all on DJT stock. I'll see you Monday. Thank you.